Good day everyone. Today I'm going to give a primer about India's Unified Payments Interface. Nothing but the UPI which we are very used to now. This video is split into 3 chapters. First one is what is UPI, a brief overview. And we will look at a brief history prior to UPI. Nothing but NEFT and IMPS. And the third chapter is the most important one, which involves the terminologies in UPI, the parties involved, customer registration process, and the transaction flow. Now let's look at what is UPI. UPI stands for Unified Payments Interface. This is a real-time payment channel introduced by National Payments Corporation of India, NPCI. Traditionally, real-time payments are very much bound to the banking or the net banking application provided by the bank, or they have like M-Visa or MasterPass QR, etc. There are traditional methods associated with the scheme or with the bank. So the customer is hard bound to use one particular bank account. So here came UPI and then said, you have a banking app, add any of a bank account that you currently have and just send money based on the customer's mobile number or a VPA. So that particular link where a real-time payment system was associated with a particular banking application or with a particular scheme was broken, and the customer now had the freedom to add any of their bank accounts and then do a transaction. We will look at it in detail in the subsequent chapters. UPI provides an intelligent two-factor authentication method. Why I'm saying it intelligent is because traditionally two-factor has always been associated with an OTP being entered apart from a PIN. But what UPI did was the device becomes the first factor and the customer's PIN becomes the second factor. UPI also provides P2P based transactions or P2M transactions. Also, UPI provides push and pull payments both. Traditionally, again, real-time payments are always push based transactions. Mobile based real-time payment transactions are push transactions. But what UPI did was it allowed push and pull. In UPI's terminologies, pay and collect transaction. In UPI 2.0, they allowed recurring payments and much more as well. A brief look into the stats. If you look into the stats, since it was launched about 5 years back, it has seen a very exponential growth. As it stands today, the transactions are worth about 5,04,800 crores. That's the volume of UPI transactions as it stands today. Let's look at a brief history of what was the payment systems available for customers prior to UPI, namely NEFT and IMPS. This is important because the basics of how an account is identified is still used in UPI. Let's look at a basic. In India, if you're having a savings or a checking account, an account is uniquely identified by two things. First one is an IFSC code. An IFSC code is unique for every bank branch, and an account number is a unique number that is given for an account in that particular bank branch or across the bank itself. So a combination of IFSC code and an account number is a unique identifier for an account across all the banks. So the first payment method was around in the time frame of 2005, which was NEFT, and it was not a real-time payment system but a near real-time payment system, where rather I should call it as a fund transfer mechanism. Why I'm calling real-time? Because the transactions are cleared or paid in batches, and it is operated by the Reserve Bank of India itself. The method for doing a transfer via NEFT was by using the customer's bank account number and the IFSC code, and it was working very well, and it had its own very well-oiled mission. And as I said, this was not a real-time payment system but a near real-time payment system. IMPS was launched by NPCI, and it was a proper real-time payment system and did not have a lag. Whenever a customer initiates a payment method using IMPS, Payee would receive the money immediately using IMPS. But what IMPS did was, like the IFSC code and the bank account number, a unique MMID was attached to every account based on the customer's mobile number. So if a customer has a mobile number and the customer registers with the phone banking, so there is a unique MMID that is associated with every account that the customer has. And the issuer bank, that is the bank where the customer holds the account creates this MMID and provides the customer. Customers could transact using an SMS, or they could go to an ATM, or they can do via net banking. So IMPS also did how a traditional real-time payment systems would do, and IMPS was working very well, and MMID was not mandatory as well. The customers could still transact using IFSC and account number using IMPS methodology, and IMPS is a real-time payment system. Let's look at quick pros and cons of IMPS. As I said, IMPS worked very well, where it provided an instant payment or a fund transfer mechanism, and customers could transact using IFSC code and account number, or a combination of mobile and MMID. However, the challenges with the IMPS were the users still needed to remember the beneficiary's mobile number, MMID details, and MMID was a number, so how to store the MMID numbers, and traditional issues that people had, those were still persistent. And the second factor was facilitated using an OTP which the customer had to enter. Now let's see how UPI kind of revolutionized this entire real-time payment process. Before I jump into how UPI works, let's quickly understand the terminologies used. A payer is a person or an entity who pays the money, that is, whose account gets debited and then is transferred to the payee's account. A payee is an entity who receives the money. It could be a merchant or a receiver of the money. A beneficiary bank is where the payee maintains an account, the bank which maintains the fund for the payee. So its job is to receive the money and then credit it to the payee's account. A remitter bank is the bank where the payer maintains the account and who debits the money from the payer's account and then sends it to the beneficiary bank. So these are some terminologies that are used in UPI world. So I just thought we'll have a quick brief on the terminologies. So what does payment system providers do? So payment system providers are entities who develop apps and work with the banks to acquire new customers and to facilitate the payments. PSP's job is primarily to provide the front end or mobile app to the customers, and they work closely with NPCI and also with the bank. It could be a remitter bank or a beneficiary bank, and then ensure that the transaction flows across the ecosystem. So these PSPs can be the bank themselves. So the bank can themselves register as a PSP and do the job of what a PSP should do, like developing an app and then facilitating the payment, etc. Or there could be third-party application providers or the fintech companies, like we all know, like PhonePe, Google Pay, Amazon Pay. So these all entities register as a third-party providers, and they also become PSP and work with the banks, because the PSP can't operate themselves. They have to work with the bank or NPCI to ensure that UPI transactions flow. So let's look at a key terminology in UPI. It's called virtual payment address. It's VPA. So the virtual payment address looks like something like this. Name at PSP. A name is a unique name that is given by the PSP or a customer's choice, and a PSP handle which the NPCI provides for the PSP. So when a customer registers her or his account in a particular PSP app, this is the first thing that happens, where the PSP provides a VPA handle for a given account. One single bank account can have any number of VPA handles. Let's say I am a customer and I have an account with HDFC, and I am registering my UPI with the HDFC bank app itself. So my UPI would look something like this, because HDFC mobile payment app will have a handle of HDFC bank, and I would have a customer name of, let's say, UPI VPA. And I'm taking the same account and then registering with Google Pay. Then Google Pay would give me a handle of, let's say, payments1, or I put it as payments-1, and then I register it as OK HDFC Bank. And let's say I am taking the same HDFC account and then registering in PhonePe, then I would have something like @YBL, which designates the payment handle that NPCI provided to PhonePe. So one particular bank account can have any number of UPI handles based on how the customer links that particular bank account with different UPI apps. So one PSP can tie up with any number of banks to get the PSP handle. As on today, Amazon Pay works with Axis Bank, but let's say Google Pay has tied up with 4 different banks to issue the PSP handles. So Google Pay works with Axis, HDFC, ICICI and SBI. So the PSP handle could be at OK Axis, OK HDFC Bank, OK ICICI or at the rate OK SBI. So one PSP can work with multiple banks as well. Like MMID in IMPS, we have a VPA handle for UPI. Now let us look at the customer registration process. The customer registration process involves 4 steps. The first one is the customer to download the PSP app of her or his choice, and then the customer registration process itself, and the third adding a bank account, and then 4th step is generating the UPI PIN. So the first step in the customer registration process is to download the PSP mobile app from the Play Store or the App Store. So this PSP mobile app which the customer downloads has 2 important components. First one is the mobile functionality that the PSP provides, and secondly there is an NPCI SDK. It's a library that is uniquely provided by NPCI to the PSP, which is embedded within the particular app. So what this SDK does is it provides the feature to securely capture the OTP or the PIN or any biometrics, the card number, etc. And it encrypts that details and then sends it to NPCI. So the second step is the hard binding or the device fingerprinting process, which acts as the first factor authentication in UPI. Let's see how it is done. So once the customer downloads the PSP app, then the customer is asked to select the SIM card of the mobile number which the customer wants to register with. This is the same mobile number that the customer should have registered with the bank account as well. So once the customer selects the SIM card of the mobile number, then there is an outbound SMS which is sent from that particular mobile to the PSP. So whenever a transaction is done, it is to be authenticated that it came from the same device which the customer registered at the time of the customer registration process. So this is what is called as device fingerprinting. So this is the second step in the customer registration process. Now let's look at the third step of the customer registration process, where the customer has to add a bank account. I have just taken the example of Beam again, but it could be any customer, but it could be any PSP app. So now let's look at the process. So customer is given a list of banks where she or he can choose from. Once the customer selects the bank, then PSP forms a request to NPCI with the mobile number that the customer has registered with to NPCI. NPCI receives the request and forwards that request to the issuer bank. So what happens here is the PSP server identifies the mobile number. With the mobile number provided, it forwards a request to the issuer bank to get the list of all bank accounts that the customer has. So let's say I have 2 accounts with HDFC, then the PSP app would send my mobile number to the issuer bank, which is HDFC, and it expects HDFC to return those 2 bank accounts. So as I said, the bank retrieves all the accounts linked to that particular mobile number and passes it to the UPI server, that is NPCI, and PSP receives it and then stores the IFSC and the account number that are mapped for that particular UPI and the device ID, and then shows it to the customer. So now the moment the customer chooses a particular bank account, in this step the PSP talks to the issuer bank, retrieves all the bank accounts linked to that particular mobile number and displays it to the customer to select that particular bank account. In this particular step, the PSP creates a VPA handle for that particular customer linked to that particular bank account. Now let's look at the last step in the customer registration process, which is setting up a PIN. So the customer selects the generate UPI PIN option on the PSP app, which is forwarded to the issuer bank through NPCI UPI server. So what happens here is the issuer bank knows the mobile number of the customer and sends an OTP to the customer separately, and this OTP is not provided back to NPCI or PSP server. So then the customer is asked to enter on the PSP app the debit card number, the last 6 digits of it, and expiry date and the OTP that the customer received. This is securely captured by the NPCI SDK. This is forwarded to the PSP server, which then forwards it to NPCI. So what NPCI does is it decrypts that particular data that is received from the SDK directly, and then encrypts it back and then sends it to the issuer bank with a key that the issuer bank understands. So here the issuer bank validates the details that the customer provided, like the debit card number and the expiry date, and then stores the PIN number that the customer has entered here. So here the key thing here is the PSP server does not know the PIN, neither the NPCI. The PIN is only stored by the issuer bank, the banking entity. So the PSP has the information of the VPA handle and the bank account related to it, which includes the account number and also the IFSC code. It does not know the UPI PIN. Only the UPI PIN is known to the issuer bank. So this concludes the customer registration process. Now let's look at the transaction flow. UPI provides different types of transactions like push, pull, etc. I'm going to cover only the push transaction flow here. So let's see how it works. First, the customer initiates the payment transaction using the UPI payment app. So what is captured is the payee details. It could be the UPI handle and also the PIN number for that particular VPA. So once when the payer PSP receives that particular request, then it is forwarded to NPCI. What NPCI does is it forwards the transaction to the payee PSP. Why should it forward? Because what we have now is only the VPA. We need the account number and the IFSC code associated with that particular VPA. So the Payee PSP provides it back to the UPI. Then the NPCI server then checks with the remitter bank to debit the funds from the payer's account. So NPCI works first with the remitter bank, and once the money is debited, then it sends a credit request to the beneficiary bank. The beneficiary bank credits the payee's account and then responds to the NPCI UPI server. Then NPCI UPI server responds with the status of the transaction through the payer PSP to the customer. So this is a typical transaction flow of a push transaction. This is also called a four-party model because you have a payer PSP, you have a payee PSP, you have a beneficiary bank, you have a remitter bank. There could be scenarios where these entities are the same. The remitter bank could be same as the beneficiary bank, and the payer PSP and the payee PSP could be the same as well. So, but I've taken the worst case scenario where the payer PSP is different to that of payee PSP and the beneficiary bank is different to that of the remitter bank here. So in this particular flow, this transaction where the payer PSP sends to the UPI server is called request pay, and NPCI responds with a response pay API. The same thing with the beneficiary bank and the remitter bank, whereas the transaction request that goes from the NPCI server to the payee PSP is called request pay detail and response pay detail. So let's look at the responsibilities of all the parties involved. The payer PSP is responsible to onboard a new customer, create a UPI ID, and also do the first factor authentication, that is the device binding. So the moment the payer PSP gets a transaction, the payer PSP is responsible to do the first factor authentication. A payee PSP is responsible to onboard a customer or a merchant. I mean, generally the payee PSP could be supporting merchant-based transactions like P2M transactions. So the payee PSP is responsible to onboard a merchant and facilitate the money transfer to the merchant. The remitter bank is responsible to debit the bank account for the transaction, as you might guess, and it also does the storage and verification of the UPI PIN. This is very important here. So we should not assume that the payer PSP is responsible for the UPI PIN. The UPI PIN is stored at the bank end. Lastly, the beneficiary bank is responsible to process the credit and then deposit the money onto the payee's account. So what's more, what we have not covered in this particular PPT or in this particular video is that we have not looked at how a pull transaction works. There are different type of transactions that could be done with Aadhaar number, which is like a social security number in India, and there could be transactions done with MMID. And as I said, we have not looked at different types of models like two-party model, three-party model, etc. And UPI 2.0 provides a variety of transactions like web-based transactions, recurring payments, etc. We have not looked at it at all in this particular video. I intend to cover in future videos when possible. Thank you for watching the video. I hope you learned something new from it. Do subscribe to the channel and like the video. I would love to hear your comments as well. Thanks again.